Okay. Alrighty. Welcome, everyone. Sorry about the late start. Technical difficulties out the wazoo here. So, recap on OSCON. So, it's basically a week-long open source conference, and it was pretty amazing. This guy could agree. So I'll just go through my notes from the 4 days that I was there. I took markdown notes, so they're actually pretty okay. And I'll send these out once after this presentation. So on Tuesday, let's see, come on. Control Shift M, okay. The power of Atom. Stuff on the left comes the stuff on the right. Markdown, beautiful. All right, so on Tuesday, this was a tutorial day, so I went to 2 4-hour-long tutorials, and one of them was on cryptography, and Rackspace actually put it on, and it was pretty great. It talked about just all the general information that you need to know as a programmer in order to make sane decisions. It usually boiled down to, if you're going to hash something, just use bcrypt. It's like a work factor of 12, and then you're pretty much good to go. But then it also go into, what is a work factor and why does it matter, and that kind of thing. And it's really just making it infeasible to compute all the values and guess them. And talked about scrypt, which is another one that's coming up. It's meant to help prevent against threats with huge budgets. There's a lot here. I might give a talk on this alone. Yeah, basically, sweet data stuff. It was awesome. Web Security Essentials was the other 4-hour one. And it was a lot more just kind of a survey of all the different security things that you should probably be aware of. Keeping things up to date, avoiding SQL injection attacks. Make sure you check permissions so you can't log in and then change the URL and be like, oh, you're the other user stuff and all that stuff. Some overlap, talking about encryption and all that kind of thing again. And talking about filtering the stuff that you put into your data and escaping your output so you don't have cross-site scripting and that kind of stuff. So it was really just a broad overview of all those issues. So on Wednesday, the actual sessions began, which were usually about 50 minutes long. And there was also some keynote stuff. Might have done. But yeah, the keynotes were basically about microservices being cool. And so that was neat. Here we go. So one of the talks I went to on Wednesday was about articulating design decisions. And basically talking with the people that have stake in the project as a designer and trying to get buy-in. And some of the things that you run into, like the CEO button, which is some sort of way off in that field request from an executive that just throws off the entire design. And making the homepage do everything, which makes usability go down the toilet. And basically trying to understand their point of view and making sure that you have a rationale for your design and being able to take a break and come back when you have a little bit more time to work on, what was just discussed instead of, rushing into a decision. So it was a bunch of that stuff. And it also had this shady tactic of painting a duck, which is basically having some purposeful distraction that's small to basically keep people focused on that rather than nitpicking and destroying the rest of the design. So it was a pretty fun one. Okay, coding in the flow. Now this one was about getting into flow, that state of flow where you're really focused on the task at hand, and time seems to fly by, and you're really productive, and have a great experience. The biggest thing about this talk was that it was a lot of preamble and
Stop scrolling.
oh, sorry. But yeah, it's basically a lot of preamble, and so we didn't get to the actual meat of the topic because we're out of time. But the big takeaways are just having identifiable goals that are achievable, and you get feedback as you get to that goal. So you can see that you're making progress. And of course, limiting distractions. There was another talk. Let's see. Ah, yes, this one. Now, this one was a guy who worked at a Flash sales site for fashion. And they had a monolithic application, and they decided to go the microservices route with Scala. And what they ended up doing is making their own deployment tool. And it was fraught with some peril because, well, they called it Iron Cannon. And they over-engineered it so that they could deploy to many different boxes at the same time. But then they ran into concurrency issues with, services needing to deploy in a specific order and that kind of thing. And then the tool itself was hard to test because it was the thing that was deploying things in production. So takeaway for me was this: it's probably not the best route. If you do write your own tool, keep it simple. But try to use something that's actually out there first. I think this is less of a problem nowadays, because this is more like 2012, 2013, and microservices have really taken off since then. And this one, creating trust organizations, was an interesting topic, because it went through a lot of different, basically, stages of, types of companies, ranging from like the CEO basically handing down everything, or they're color-coded, there's some sort of system here. But anyways, it's advocating for more of a self-organized organization that has trust and is able to get things done in an interesting way. And so there are some organizations that have actually done this and done pretty well. There's a lot more to this topic. And if you have any more questions or feedback or anything about any of these, feel free to come hunt me down. I'd love to talk about this stuff. So another one I went to was Hardware Hacking 101. And this was very interesting. So it was a Wi-Fi enabled SD card that you could very easily hack into and then just do stuff with. So it was an interesting view into that kind of world, and slightly disconcerting at how easy it was to get into it. Because there's like, oh, there's just a telnet when you boot it up. Let's see. The paradox of technology choice. This was one of the talks. There was another one that I went to that was about how to choose software that you use. And it was basically talking about how the organization that this person worked for had a whole bunch of different dependencies, and it was just kind of a mess. So they decided to standardize things, but at the same time, not making it be a specific committee that would gatekeep and do that kind of thing. What they did instead was just say, okay, we have these standards for new technologies, these defaults for technologies. And if you want to use something new, just make sure it meets these standards for documentation and for robustness and for monitoring and all that. So that was pretty neat. It's like allowing autonomy with responsibility. And then there are a bunch of birds of a feathers that I went to a NoSQL one, which ended up being more about React DB, which was really neat because it's a distributed system, so it's able to scale pretty massively. And it's really important to not lose data with that. So that was an interesting introduction. And then there was a Birds of a Feather session. Basically, these sessions are just discussion groups, often like 10 or 20 people. And so there's another one on Erlang, which is used in distributed systems, and ReactDB is actually made with it. So a lot of interesting exposure to things like CAT theorem, which is consistency, availability, and partition tolerance, and that kind of thing. And got me really interested in Erlang. So on Thursday, we had more talks. And so this is the other technology choice one. This one's about choosing boring technology. Basically, using what you already have unless there's a good reason not to, and recognizing that oftentimes new technologies have a lot of unknowns. And so sometimes it's better to go with the beast that you know, and you know some of its wrinkles, rather than the things that you don't quite see. At the same time, it really makes sense to add new technologies sometimes. Just make sure you talk about it and find some ways to use it in a smaller part that's lower risk, and then go from there. And then if it replaces something in your old system, then remove the old thing. I know for us, we have like Entity Framework and Dapper and 4 different database access things. So we have not been removing the old thing here, historically. This one, don't change languages, change your language, was presented by this really charismatic, kind of off-the-wall Aussie guy who was basically hacking Perl, well, metaprogramming Perl to have better syntax and things that just removing a lot of boilerplate. They gave some C++ examples too, because things are really weird there too. So basically, it's just looking at ways to use the existing language to alter itself in order to get rid of those annoyances, which was really cool. The unfortunate caveat is that the Perl processor wasn't fast enough for this to make a lot of sense in production, but that's getting changed too. All right. And then I went to a talk called Reactive Frontend. And so this was not about React.js, or it was not about functional reactive programming, but it was about reactive extensions inside of JavaScript. And it was really neat because you could do filtering and mapping and all that kind of thing and set up this pipeline of transformation. And if you have a lot of data streaming through, if you're just using ES5, filtering, mapping, and that kind of thing, you would have lots of temporary arrays going on. So you'd run into performance issues. But with reactive extensions, RxJS, they have reactive extensions for all sorts of languages, including C#. But anyways, for JavaScript, this allows you to make a pipeline of transformation, and then it only kind of all comes together when you do .subscribe. So it streamlines that whole process and makes it a lot more efficient. There's just a different way of programming and thinking about things. Pretty neat stuff. This one, Bryant and I went to. This guy says, stop writing JavaScript frameworks. So just tired of porting things over from one framework to another, and they wouldn't quite match up, and that kind of thing. And basically, he was going for web components using built-in browser stuff, but also polyfilling for older browsers. Web components and things like Polymer are still a little controversial, so I don't know how much this would really gain traction with. But I don't know, some good points. I mean, there's something to be said for making code portable and not having to rewrite it just because you're switching a framework. And there are architectural ways to structure things in order to not actually have that be an issue. A really neat talk, which actually will send out a video link because he also gave it at PyCon, is a test-driven repair. So with test-driven repair, it's basically talking about writing pinning tests around old code, and then refactoring the functionality, and then writing new tests around that. And some of the things that you can think about during that, and using test cases instead of having a bunch of different tests, so that your test code doesn't get out of hand either. But the really interesting thing, when he was talking about functional core imperative shell, which is another name for Uncle Bob's clean architecture, it's basically having all the business rules and things. Well, in this case, it was just bringing those transformations of data into their own functions, so you could test them trivially easy, unit testing. But then having like file I/O be its own method, and then just using those other functions. Once you see it, it's great. Right. We're getting close. So,
like I'll have 5 minutes to maybe say it.
Right. So yeah, this one's great. There's also one about imposter syndrome, but it was kind of more about being a sysadmin, not as much about being an imposter. So that was interesting. That's mostly it. There's a screen reader talk, which was neat to see. And that's all I got to say. Cool. Hand it off to this guy.
All right, let's see what we can do in 5 minutes. Ready? All right, how do computers work? Hold on. And
I think your notes were in documents.
show me the money.
Need a dot.
And then documents. Where is it? OSCON. No, that's the wrong one. That's 2014.
Your notes. I mean your home folder. Try your home directory.
There goes the 5 minutes.
Shh. Here we are. Okay. Oh.
Yeah, while he's doing that, I'll just say it's just really inspiring, and really encourage you to start playing around with code from that time. And really need to see what's out there, what people are doing.
Okay, so, all right. So probably the coolest thing I saw at OSCON was a presentation about giving presentations. It was really, really good. It was like, if you've ever heard of the Pixar rules of like how to write a story, there's like gems in there. This is the same way. Just at a high level, there's things that he would build up as he would present. And the first thing he did was the rule of 3. And some people have heard of like pictures being more like pleasing to the eye when it's divided into thirds, that kind of thing. But he talked about it in a way that like the things you do, like, so say you are trying to give a point, right? You would give 3 points. And so he had some examples. But the rule of 3, it has a lot of psychological effects, right? So it's more trustworthy if you have 3 reasons and not more. More sounds fishy. Less doesn't sound like you have enough information. But there's something to it. And like as he demoed that, it was wild. It was wild, like how good the flow felt. So he also talked about structuring your presentation as a story. And I don't know how much time. Well, we got 2 minutes, so I can't really get into a lot of this. I actually would totally focus just on this because it's awesome. Let's see. But essentially, you have a story. So you've got a challenge, response, solution, autopsy, detail. And he does this like threes and, damn it. Okay, so.
I wanted to schedule a separate.
Yeah.
Dang it! No!
And then you can just demonstrate this style.
Yes.
That's true, right? So, but you know, politicians have used this. I'm just going to cover this, and then I'll schedule a thing for the next because there's only a few minutes left. I think we can cover just this. So humans really like conflict and contrast, and so interesting story adds emotion, right? You can create conflict from a change that's needed, or a problem that needs to be solved, or a difficulty that needs to be overcome. And he would do like conflict versus solution, conflict versus proposed versus emotion. Let's see. So he would talk about how like you pick somebody up and then you put them down, right? Basically, like you'll say, oh, okay, that's why a lot of these presentations they'll say, tell your story, because your story typically has like a lot of natural conflict in it. Like, we tried this and it failed, right? Oh, you know, then we tried this and that failed too. Oh, you know, and then by like the third time, you've got your audience engaged because they don't want to have that like third, like, it's like, I don't want to have this fail anymore. I'm like, I'm with you, man. Like, tell me what the answer is, you know? So it was interesting to see him sort of demonstrate that. And so after getting through the rule of three, basically said structure your presentation with 3 parts, so 3 different parts, right? And then like if you have more information, you can like give like a bonus topic. And that's how, if you like have too much information, you like usually plan for less. And then like the bonus topic, if you have time, can come up and it's like, oh, sweet, bonus material, right? But typically you're gonna want your story to build. So if you like have really good stuff, like you've divided into 3 sections and you can like say, which one's more awesome than the other? If you layer it so that like the most awesome thing happens at the end, you wanna like knock them down at the end, you know, and build up to it. So some people ask like, what about that? Tell them what you said, tell them, you know, what you're gonna say. I'm saying this out of order, but then tell them what you told them, right? And he said, don't do that because that sucks. Like there's no suspense, right? People want mystery. He's like, one really cool thing to grab people's attention is like, you say something like, well, okay, so he said there's this technique, right, that you can use to just get people like wanting to know the answer. It's just this like weird trick, right? And like not a lot of people know about it, right? But it's just like, it's just like, it's this, basically I'm doing it right now. Like, I'm like telling you like that it's like, you know, there's this mystery involved, right? And like this suspense. And so that goes in direct contrast with that, because if you like tell everybody what you're gonna say up front, then that's like, you know, I'm gonna tune out. But you typically are gonna be presenting in front of a really smart audience, right? And so they're gonna be like engaged as you tell them through, and especially if your presentation has this conflict, right, that it's gonna resolve, then people feel more committed to it, right? Let's see. So, and that kind of goes into the like presenting to convince. And this is really interesting because, so the first one is a rule of 3, real simple, right? You know, 3 words, 3 parts to your presentation, 3 this, pictures with thirds, right? More interesting to see, like all kind of like getting people to like be like, feel like there's a natural flow to your presentation. So the second one was like, okay, second topic, presenting to convince, and I told you a little bit about like how to get people like excited about what you're going to tell them. But so in order to convince somebody of something, you have to like meet these 3 needs. First, it has to make logical sense, right? And then it has to be ethical, right? And it has to hit people on an emotional level. And that emotional level is like, that's like the big one, right? And actually, I think he ordered it in that order because it's like, you know, if any of those don't match up, it's immediately like dismissive. And so I'll give you one. I'm going to close because we've got another meeting coming up after this, but I'll leave you with this one really cool trick that he talked about, and that is, well, there's a couple, but I'll just do one. So people don't hear negatives, right? When you talk. So you could say something like, and this is kind of tricky, but it's just there's like little gems all throughout this. So you'll say, don't take my word for it unless you think you're ready, right? Which is basically like saying, take my word for it, you're ready, you know? And like, think about that. And he also said, you know, playing psychological tricks on people and telling them that you're doing that doesn't reduce the impact of like the psychological trick. So like you could tell people that and they're like, yeah, you're tricking me, but I'm with you, you know? So anyway, that was that. Okay, there was a lot more to OSCON. I may schedule a follow-up thing, but I think we're gonna shut it down for now. Okay.